I'm so glad you're here. If you're watching this, please like, subscribe, and listen to my story. My name is Beverly, and for 40 years, I've poured my heart and soul into my little diner, a place I built with my own two hands. To my son and his wife, Harper, I was just a simple waitress, the same wife whose lavish lifestyle I was secretly paying for. Last Saturday, she walked into my diner, in front of all my loyal customers, and said to my face, "Your food is for pigs." She thought she was humiliating a poor old woman. She had no idea she was talking to the owner, and I was about to teach her a lesson in respect that she would never, ever forget. I want to know how far this story of a mother's justice has traveled, so please tell me in the comments where you are watching from. The sizzle of bacon on the flat-top griddle was a sound more comforting to me than any Sunday hymn. That, and the rich, dark aroma of percolating coffee, formed the morning symphony of the Morning Glory Diner. It was a familiar, grounding ritual that had anchored my life for 40 years, a steady rhythm in a world that had often felt unsteady. I was wiping down the long Formica counter, the same one my late husband, Robert, had built with his own hands from a single slab of oak. A small framed photo of him sat by the register, his warm, crinkling smile a constant, silent presence in the bustling room. This place was his legacy, and now it was mine. "Morning, Beverly," grunted Frank, a retired mechanic who had occupied the same corner stool every morning since 1999. "Coffee's good and strong today." "Only way to serve it, Frank," I said with a smile, topping off his mug. It was these small, comfortable exchanges that made the long hours worthwhile. To him, and to everyone else who walked through that door, I was just Beverly, the hard-working widow who ran a decent, no-frills diner. As Frank returned to his newspaper, I felt the familiar buzz in my apron pocket. In a quiet moment, I pulled out my cell phone. The screen lit up not with a text message, but with the secure login for my BH Holdings portfolio. I shielded the screen with my hand, my eyes quickly scanning the numbers. The market was up. The string of zeros that followed the first digit was a silent, staggering secret. A universe away from the 75-cent coffee refills and the $12 pancake specials listed on the chalkboard above my head. It was Robert's and my pact, a promise made long ago to protect our son from the poison of unearned wealth. We wanted him to value a hard day's work, not a stock ticker. I locked the phone and slipped it back into my pocket, just as the diner's old wall phone began its shrill, insistent ring. Maria, my loyal manager of 15 years, picked it up. Her professional smile faltered for just a second. "Beverly," she called out, her voice a little too tight. "It's for you. It's Harper." I took a deep breath, wiping my hands on my apron before taking the receiver. The warmth of the diner seemed to recede as I braced myself. "Good morning, Harper." "Beverly, darling. How are you?" Her voice was a confection of artificial sweetness, a sound I had learned to distrust. Before I could answer, she launched into her real purpose. "Listen, I'm in a bit of a bind. There's this handbag, an absolutely divine vintage piece. It's an investment, really. It won't be available for long, and I simply must have it." In the background, I could hear the faint, defeated murmur of my son, Alex. "Harper, please, we talked about this. We can't—" "How much of a bind, dear?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly even. "It's $5,000, she said, the number tossed out as if it were a trifle. The line went quiet for a moment. I thought of the $5 tips my waitresses were so grateful to receive. "Harper, dear, I'm afraid that's just not possible right now," I said, the well-rehearsed lie slipping easily from my lips. "You know I don't keep that kind of cash on hand. Things are a bit tight this month." A sigh of pure, unadulterated exasperation came through the line, a sound like a petulant child being denied a toy. "Oh, for goodness sake, Mother!" she snapped, the sweet veneer vanishing. "Don't be so dramatic. It's just a little pocket change." The casual, stinging cruelty of it hung in the air. Before I could even process the insult, she pivoted, her voice becoming aggressively cheerful again. Anyway, we're coming over for the 4th of July barbecue this weekend. I'm bringing a few of my friends, so they can finally meet you. I expect you to have something decent prepared. We'll be there around 2. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. I'll see what I can do, I managed to say, my throat tight. Great. Talk to you later, she chirped, and the line went dead. I slowly, carefully placed the receiver back in its cradle. The familiar, comforting sounds of the diner rushed back in, but they sounded distant now, muffled. Maria shot me a look of deep concern from across the room, but I just offered a weak, dismissive wave of my hand. I walked back to my small office, a tiny, cluttered room filled with invoices and old order forms. On my desk, next to a stack of menus, was the checkbook for the Robert Hayes Vocational Scholarship Fund. I had just finished writing out the month's major donation, a check to the local community college's trade program. I looked down at the amount, the zeros stretching across the paper, $50,000. Pocket change, I thought, a bitter, mirthless smile touching my lips for the first time that day. Right. The aroma of grilling hamburgers and the sound of cheerful chatter in my backyard should have filled me with the simple, patriotic warmth of the 4th of July. Instead, standing by the cooler filled with iced tea and lemonade, I only felt the distinct chill of Harper's artificial sweetness. She had arrived with her 2 friends, Tiffany and Chad, a trio dressed for a rooftop cocktail party, not a casual backyard barbecue. Their expensive fabrics and sharp silhouettes were comically out of place amidst my worn picnic tables and citronella candles. "Beverly, darling, these paper plates are a bit flimsy, don't you think?" Harper commented loudly, holding up a plate adorned with a small American flag as if it were a strange and distasteful artifact. "So very festive," Tiffany added with a barely concealed smirk, her eyes scanning my simple, well-tended garden with an air of profound boredom. I saw Alex flinch over the grill, a quick, guilty glance in my direction, before his wife's sharp glare sent his eyes dutifully back to the sizzling patties. He was trapped, a silent, complicit bystander to my slow, methodical humiliation. They moved through my carefully tended yard like a small, critical stormfront, their voices a low murmur of condescension. "The lawn chairs are a bit weathered, aren't they?" I overheard Chad whisper to Harper. She laughed, a sound like ice cubes clinking in a crystal glass. "Everything here has character," she replied, the words so loaded with sarcasm it was practically a weapon. I ignored them, focusing on my other guests, my neighbors and a few old friends who were happily enjoying the hot dogs and my famous potato salad. I forced a smile and handed Harper a plate. She took it, her perfectly manicured fingers barely touching the cheap paper. Then, as if a brilliant, cruel idea had just struck her, she turned to me, raising her voice so everyone in the immediate vicinity could hear. "You know, Mother," she began, using the formal title she reserved for her public pronouncements, "this house is just so much work for one person. It's so old, and the upkeep must be a fortune. We were thinking, you should really consider selling it." The chatter around us died down. Alex froze over the grill, spatula hovering in midair. "You could move into one of those lovely senior living communities," Harper continued, her voice now filled with a performative, cloying concern. "They have activities, prepared meals. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing. It would be so much more appropriate for your age." I looked around my yard, at the sturdy oak tree Robert had planted the year Alex was born, at the flower beds overflowing with the zinnias I had tended for 30 years. This wasn't just a house, it was the landscape of my life. "This house is full of memories, Harper," I said, my voice quiet but firm. She let out a small, pitying laugh, a sound that grated on my nerves. "Memories don't pay the bills, Beverly." The cruelty was breathtaking in its simplicity. Before I could formulate a response, she clapped her hands together, a new malicious idea sparking in her eyes, a look I was beginning to know all too well. "Oh, by the way, next week, I'm bringing Tiffany and Chad to support your little diner. They are just dying to see how you spend your days doing, well, all that hands-on work." The threat was clear, wrapped in the guise of a favor. It was a performance, a public shaming she was already savoring. Later, as the sun began to set and the first distant pop of fireworks echoed through the neighborhood, they finally prepared to leave. As they walked away, a gust of wind caught a stack of paper napkins on their table, scattering them across the lawn. I went to pick them up, my heart still heavy and cold despite the warm summer air. Lying on the grass, half hidden beneath a fallen napkin, was a single folded piece of paper. I picked it up. It was Harper's credit card statement, accidentally dropped from her purse. My eyes scanned the columns of figures, and the breath caught in my throat. The balance due was over $30,000. The crumpled credit card statement in my hand felt hotter than the grill had been all afternoon. A balance of over $30,000. It wasn't just a number, it was a confession, a motive, a blueprint for their entire campaign against me. The desperate demand for a $5,000 loan, the constant cloying pressure to sell my home, the sudden sharp interest in my life's work, it all snapped into focus with a sickening clarity. I finally understood. The planned visit to the diner wasn't a whim. It was a calculated performance, a stage play designed to humiliate me in my own space, perhaps to push me one step closer to believing their narrative, that I was too old, too tired, too incompetent to manage my own life. A narrative they desperately needed me to accept. I walked back inside, the screen door slapping shut behind me, the sound echoing in the sudden quiet of the house. I sat in my small home office, a room no one ever entered, the lingering smell of charcoal from the barbecue, a bitter reminder of the party. The laughter and casual cruelty echoed in my ears. Robert's voice, a gentle warning from years ago as we watched a young Alex struggle to build a model airplane, came back to me with the force of a physical blow. "Let him stand on his own 2 feet, Beverly. Don't cushion all his falls." For years I had failed that promise, cushioning not just his accidental falls, but the deliberate, reckless leaps of his wife. My secret financial support hadn't been a safety net. It had been a gilded cage, preventing my son from ever truly growing up. The time for passive endurance, for silent, misguided protection, was over. My first call was to Maria. I dialed the diner's number, my fingers steady and sure. "Morning glory," she answered, her voice warm and familiar. "Maria, it's Beverly." "Everything okay, ma'am? You seemed upset after they left yesterday," she said, her voice laced with the genuine concern Harper could only feign. "I'm fine, Maria. Better than fine," I told her, a new hardness in my own voice surprising even me. "Listen, next Saturday, we're going to have some special guests, my daughter-in-law and her friends." I could hear Maria's breath catch on the other end. "I need you to be there. I need you to treat them like any other customer, but I want you to keep your eyes and ears open. Don't react to anything they say or do, no matter how provocative." "Can you do that for me?" "Of course, ma'am. For you, anything," she said, her loyalty a balm to my wounded spirit. After I hung up, I turned to the old oak bookshelf in the corner of the office. From the bottom shelf, hidden behind a set of encyclopedias from the 1980s, I pulled out the heavy mahogany box Robert had kept his most important papers in. A fine layer of dust coated the lid. It smelled faintly of cedar and old paper, a scent of security and quiet strength that I desperately needed. I lifted the lid. Inside, beneath the deed to our first home and Alex's birth certificate, I found his worn, leather-bound address book. My heart hammered against my ribs as I flipped through the pages, the paper soft with age, and there, tucked inside a small vellum sleeve, was what I was looking for: a crisp, embossed business card for Davies Financial and Legal. Arthur Davies. Robert's most trusted advisor, the architect of our hidden empire, the only other person alive who knew the full truth. I dialed the number, my fingers surprisingly steady. A familiar professional voice answered on the second ring. "Arthur Davies." "Arthur," I said, my voice clear and firm. "It's Beverly Hayes. I need you to prepare a file for me, a complete one." There was a brief, knowing pause on the other end. "Beverly, it is good to hear your voice. I've been waiting for this call. What do you need?" "I need the official ownership documents for BH Holdings, showing my position as sole chairman of the board. I need the deed to the Morning Glory Diner. And Arthur," I added, my voice hardening into something cold and sharp, "I also want a full record of all the financial support transfers I've made to Alex's account for the past 3 years. It's time for everything to come to light." Arthur Davies's voice came through the line, as steady and reassuring as it had been for the past 40 years. "Beverly, I have been waiting for this call." It was Wednesday morning, the day after the disastrous barbecue, and his words were the first solid ground I had felt under my feet since Harper had dropped her casual bombshell about selling my home. "I always hoped it would never be necessary," he continued, his voice tinged with a sad resignation. "But Robert and I prepared for this possibility. He always said, 'Protect Beverly, no matter what.' I knew this day might come." I sat in my small home office, the mahogany box of Robert's papers open on the desk before me, its faint scent of cedar filling the room. I explained everything to him in a low, even voice, the constant veiled insults that had escalated over the past year, the calculated pressure to sell my home, the shocking discovery of their massive debt, and now the planned performance at my diner. It was, I told him, a public spectacle designed to break me, to create a narrative that I was no longer competent. He listened without a single interruption, the silence on the other end a sign of his deep concentration. When I finished, he finally spoke, his tone grim. "She has crossed a line that Robert never would have tolerated," he said. He saw a fragility in Alex, a desire to please that could be exploited by the wrong person. His words sent me spiraling back to a warm summer evening in 1998. We had just closed the deal on the downtown commercial block, a monumental acquisition that had solidified BH Holdings as a major, albeit silent, player in the city's real estate market. We were standing on the porch of this very house, watching a 10-year-old Alex chase fireflies across the darkening lawn, his laughter echoing in the twilight. Robert put his arm around me, his work-roughened hand a familiar comfort on my shoulder. "We've built an empire, Bev," he whispered, his voice a mix of awe and apprehension. "But I'm terrified it will ruin him." He gestured toward our son, his eyes filled with a profound love and a deeper fear. "I don't want him to grow up entitled, thinking that a life of ease is a birthright. I've seen what that kind of money does to families, to character. I want him to know the value of a hard day's work, the satisfaction of earning his own way, the dignity in a simple life well lived." That night, under a sky full of stars, we made a pact. We would continue to live simply. We would keep the true scale of our success hidden, a quiet fortune managed by Arthur. The diner would be our anchor to the real world, a daily reminder of where we came from. Alex would be raised to believe we were merely a comfortable, middle-class family who had done well with some smart investments. We did it to protect him from the poison of unearned wealth. I just never imagined I would have to protect our legacy from him. "Beverly, are you still there?" Arthur's voice gently brought me back to the present. "Yes, Arthur, I'm here," I said, my resolve hardening into steel. "You were right to wait. I need everything ready for Saturday." "It is already done," he confirmed with quiet efficiency. "I have the complete portfolio for BH Holdings, certified copies of the diner's deed of ownership, and a detailed 5-year summary of all direct and indirect financial transfers to Mr. Alex Hayes and his wife. The preliminary total is just over $400,000. I can be at the diner in 15 minutes upon your signal. Just say the word." A wave of profound relief washed over me. The pieces were in place. The trap was set. Just as I was about to hang up, my cell phone buzzed on the desk beside the mahogany box. A text message from Harper popped onto the screen. a beacon of her arrogance. Saturday, mother. Don't disappoint me. The winking emoji was like a final insolent twist of the knife. She was so confident, so sure of her power over me and my son. She thought this was a game she had already won. I stared at the message, a cold, crystalline calm settling over me. I typed back a simple two-word reply. I'll be waiting. She had no idea what, or who, precisely, I was waiting for. Maria polished a water glass until it shone, her reflection distorted in the curved surface. The late afternoon sun streamed through the diner's large front window, casting long, lazy shadows across the checkered floor. We were alone. The last of the lunch customers had departed an hour ago, leaving behind the quiet hum of the refrigerators and the lingering, comforting scent of bleach and old coffee. It was in this peaceful, end-of-day stillness that the anxiety felt sharpest. "Ma'am, are you sure about this?" she asked, her voice low and tight, with a concern that was almost maternal. "Harper, she's not an easy person. I've seen how she looks at you, how she speaks to Alex. I just don't want to see you get hurt." "I'm more sure than ever, Maria," I replied, my gaze drifting over the familiar, comforting space of my diner. I looked at the worn red vinyl of the booths, scuffed in places from years of use, and the sturdy oak counter that Robert had built himself back in 1985. His spirit was in every joint and seam of this place. "This diner stands for something," I continued, my voice quiet but unyielding. "It stands for his hard work, for my hard work. It stands for every person who comes in here for an honest meal. I will not let her tarnish that." I walked closer to her, leaning against the counter that still held the faint scent of Robert's wood polish. The decision had settled in my soul, heavy and solid as stone. "On Saturday, when she arrives with her friends, I need you to do exactly as you always do. Greet them, take their order, serve them with a smile. It is crucial that you don't react, no matter what they say or do. I need her to feel completely in control, as if she is the star of her own little show. I need her to overplay her hand so badly that no one can deny what she is. The stage needs to be set perfectly for her performance." Maria hesitated, her hands stilling on the glass she was holding. "Ma'am," she began, her eyes dropping to the counter as if she were about to confess something. "There's something you should know. It might help." She took a deep breath, as if bracing herself. "Last week, on Tuesday, she was in here waiting for Alex to pick her up. She stepped outside to take a call, right by the side window. I was refilling the sugar dispensers. I couldn't help but overhear." Maria looked up, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and a fierce, protective anger on my behalf. "She was laughing with someone, a friend, I guess. She was talking about you." Maria paused again, struggling with the words. She said, "No, Tiffany, you don't get it. The old woman is practically sitting on a gold mine and doesn't even know it." Then she laughed again, that awful, sharp laugh. And she said she couldn't wait until she was running this greasy spoon and that the old woman wouldn't know what hit her. Greasy spoon. The words, reported secondhand, were a physical blow. This place, Robert's pride, my sanctuary, reduced to a derogatory cliché. The ache in my chest was sharp, but it was quickly cauterized by a wave of pure, clarifying anger that burned away any remaining doubt. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was about conquest. "Thank you for telling me, Maria," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "That is very helpful information." I gave her the final, simple instructions for Saturday, emphasizing again the importance of letting events unfold without interference. She nodded, her expression shifting from worry to fierce resolve. As I turned to leave, she placed a hand on my arm, her touch warm and steady. "Ma'am, it's not just me. You know that everyone who works here, from Sal in the kitchen, he calls you Mama Bev behind your back, to the young waitresses you gave a chance to, we all respect you more than words can say. We are your family here. We are with you, whatever happens." A genuine smile, the first one I'd felt in days, finally broke through my hardened expression. The loyalty of this woman and of the small, hard-working team we had built was a fortress against the coming storm. I wasn't alone in this. "Thank you, Maria," I said, my voice thick with an emotion I hadn't allowed myself to feel all week. "Now then, let's prepare for our most special guests ever." Friday passed in an unusual quiet, the kind of deep, expectant stillness that settles over the ocean just before a hurricane makes landfall. I spent the day in my garden, my hands buried in the cool, dark earth, methodically weeding the beds around my rose bushes. There was a comfort in the familiar work, a rhythm that soothed the storm brewing inside me. I trimmed the hedges, swept the porch, and polished the old brass knocker on my front door until it gleamed. I was putting my house in order, both literally and figuratively. The physical act of creating order out of small chaos was a balm to my fractured spirit. Each weed pulled was a small act of defiance, each swept leaf a clearing of the path forward. Around 4 in the afternoon, the phone rang, its shrill sound jarring the peaceful silence. I saw Alex's name on the caller ID and let it ring twice before answering, schooling my voice into a placid calm that I was far from feeling. "Hello, dear." "Mom, it's me," he said, his voice hesitant, laced with an unease that was almost palpable through the line. He was calling from his car. I could hear the faint whoosh of traffic in the background. I was just calling to check in. Are you sure you're okay with Harper bringing her friends to the diner tomorrow?" I could hear the unspoken words behind his question, the faint whisper of his conscience. He knew this was wrong. A small, buried part of him knew it was a cruel errand, and he was calling not to protect me, but to assuage his own guilt. "Of course, Alex," I replied, my voice light and airy, a perfect imitation of the obliging, simple-minded mother he and his wife believed me to be. "It's no trouble at all. I'm looking forward to welcoming your friends." "Okay, it's just, you know how Harper can be," he stammered, trailing off, unable to articulate his wife's cruelty or his own weakness. "She just wants to show you off." The lie was so thin it was transparent. Show me off? Or show her friends the quaint, common mother-in-law she had to endure? "Don't you worry about a thing, Alex," I said, cutting off his fumbling excuses. "Everything will be just fine." After we hung up, I stood in the quiet of my kitchen for a long time. The sadness I had been holding at bay finally washed over me. It was a deep, aching grief, not for what was about to happen, but for the son I had lost long ago. The boy who once would have defended me from any slight had become a man who stood silently by while his wife sharpened her knives. Later that evening, I sat in my small office, the legal documents Arthur had emailed me glowing on my computer screen. The sterile black and white text was a stark contrast to the colorful, chaotic emotions swirling inside me. I scrolled through the pages, the deed to the diner, the articles of incorporation for BH Holdings, the meticulously detailed summary of the hundreds of thousands of dollars I had poured into propping up my son's life. Seeing it all laid out like that was devastating. I had done this. My secret generosity, my misguided attempt to protect him, had enabled this monstrous sense of entitlement in them both. Just as I was about to close the file, a new email notification pinged softly in the quiet room. It was from Arthur. The subject line was simply, "Ready." I opened it. The message was brief, a short, powerful confirmation of the forces I was about to unleash. All assets are confirmed, and documents are prepared for immediate action. We await your signal, Madam Chairman. I took a deep, steadying breath, the sadness receding, replaced once more by a cold, hard resolve. The curtain was about to fall, and I was ready for my final performance. The white Mercedes sedan pulled up to the curb just after noon, its glossy finish a garish contrast to the dusty pickup trucks and worn-out sedans that filled the diner's parking lot. The Saturday lunch rush was in full swing, the clatter of silverware, the murmur of a dozen conversations, and the rich scent of sizzling bacon filled the air. Harper had arrived. She stepped out of the car, followed by her two friends, Tiffany and Chad. They stood on the sidewalk for a moment, a trio of exotic birds preening in a barnyard. Tiffany wrinkled her nose as she took in the diner's simple, honest facade. "Oh my God, Harper," she drawled, her voice dripping with disdain. "Are you sure this is the place?" Harper laughed, a high, brittle sound. "I told you it was authentic." They swept inside, a wave of expensive perfume and entitlement following them. The diner fell quiet for a beat as heads turned, my regular customers sizing up the newcomers. "Maria," Harper called out, ignoring the hostess stand where a young waitress was waiting. "We'll need a table, somewhere private." Maria, bless her heart, maintained her professional smile. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Hayes. The booths by the window are available." No, Harper said, waving a dismissive hand. "Something in the back, away from all this." She gestured vaguely at the bustling room. "We don't have a back section, ma'am," Maria said politely. "All our tables are right here." With a dramatic sigh, Harper settled for a booth, sliding onto the red vinyl as if it might stain her designer dress. The ordering process was a masterclass in condescension. Tiffany wanted a salad but interrogated Maria for 5 minutes about the origin of the lettuce. Chad ordered a cheeseburger but demanded to know if the beef was grass-fed and if the bun was artisanal. Harper simply looked at the menu with a look of theatrical confusion. "I don't even know what half of this stuff is. Just bring me something that won't give me a heart attack." I watched from behind the counter, my hands busy wiping down a clean surface, my expression neutral. Finally, when their food was ready, I picked up the tray myself. "I'll take this one, Maria," I said quietly. I placed their plates on the table, my movements steady and practiced. Harper looked up at me, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across her face. She turned to her friends, her voice a stage whisper. "See?" she said, her eyes gleaming with malice. "I told you." They ate, or rather, they picked at their food, pushing it around their plates while keeping up a stream of loud, critical commentary. The fries were too greasy, the milkshake too sweet, the coleslaw distressingly common. I continued my work, refilling coffee cups for the construction crew in the next booth, clearing plates for the elderly couple by the window, all the while feeling the heat of Harper's gaze. Finally, Chad, finished with his coffee, wanted a refill. He didn't try to catch my eye or raise his hand. He simply snapped his fingers, a sharp, ugly sound that cut through the diner's hum. "Hey, old lady," he called out, his voice laced with the casual cruelty of the privileged. "More coffee. Now." I turned, my face a placid mask. A slow, calm smile touched my lips as I picked up the coffee pot. It was a smile so serene, so utterly devoid of the anger he expected, that I saw a flicker of confusion, even unease, in Harper's eyes. "This coffee is lukewarm," Tiffany complained, pushing her mug away with a delicate flick of her wrist, though I could see the steam still curling from its surface. Their performance was becoming increasingly absurd, a poorly written play of manufactured grievances. At the table next to them, I saw Bill, a retired truck driver who had been eating breakfast here since 1992, shake his head and mutter to his wife, "Unbelievable." The whole diner was watching now, a silent audience to this uncomfortable spectacle. Harper, seemingly sensing she was losing the room's attention, decided to escalate. With a sudden, jerky motion of her arm, she accidentally knocked the heavy glass bottle of maple syrup from the edge of the table. It hit the checkered linoleum floor with a sickening crash, shattering and sending a thick, sticky brown river flowing under the table and toward the aisle. The entire diner went silent. "Oh my goodness," Harper gasped, her voice a perfect imitation of shocked surprise. She placed a hand over her heart. "How clumsy of me." She then turned her gaze directly to me, her eyes shining with a cold, triumphant light. "Beverly," she called out, her voice ringing through the quiet room, "could you possibly clean this up? It is your job, after all, isn't it?" The insult was as sharp and clear as the sound of the breaking glass. I didn't say a word. I simply turned, walked to the utility closet, and retrieved a mop and a yellow bucket. Every eye followed me as I returned to their booth. The only sounds were the soft slosh of water in the bucket and the quiet murmur of the kitchen fans. I knelt, the worn fabric of my uniform trousers pressing against the sticky floor. I picked up the larger shards of glass, my movements slow and deliberate, before dipping the mop into the bucket and beginning to clean the syrupy mess at her feet. She had won, she thought. She had brought me to my knees in front of a room full of strangers. Leaning toward Tiffany, her voice a conspiratorial whisper that carried easily through the hushed diner, she said, "See? Easy as pie." I continued to mop, absorbing every last drop of the spilled syrup. I wrung the mop out, stood up, and placed the bucket to the side. I looked directly into Harper's smug, smiling face, my own expression perfectly, unnervingly calm. "There," I said, my voice as even and smooth as the surface of a still lake. "Is there anything else you need, dear?" My serene composure seemed to infuriate Harper more than any outburst could have. She needed a reaction, a tearful breakdown, a shouted defense. She needed to see that she had wounded me. I had given her nothing but calm, polite service, and it was driving her mad. "You don't seem upset at all, do you, Mother?" she asked, her voice a low, challenging hiss. Her friends watched, their faces a mixture of boredom and anticipation, waiting for the entertainment to begin. I didn't answer her. Instead, I turned away, picking up an empty coffee pot and walking over to Bill and his wife at the next table. "More coffee, Bill?" I asked, my smile warm and genuine. He nodded gratefully, his eyes flicking for a split second toward Harper's table with a look of clear disapproval. My dismissal, my refusal to engage in her drama, was the ultimate insult. I had rendered her powerless by simply ignoring her. I felt her eyes burning into my back as I moved through the diner, tending to my real customers. The tension in their booth became a palpable thing, a dark, heavy cloud. I saw her whisper furiously to Tiffany, her gestures becoming sharp and angry. Then a decision hardened on her face. If her smaller provocations had failed, she would resort to a grand, undeniable gesture of contempt. She turned her attention back to the plate of pancakes in front of her. Slowly, theatrically, she picked up her fork. She cut a minuscule piece, lifted it to her lips, and chewed it with the exaggerated deliberation of a food critic tasting something suspect. For a moment, she was still. Then her face contorted into a mask of pure revulsion. With a dramatic shove, she pushed the plate toward the center of the table, the scraping sound loud in the now quiet diner. She rose from her seat, her movements sharp and deliberate, designed to draw every last bit of attention in the room. Every conversation stopped, every fork paused midair. She placed both palms flat on the table, leaned forward, and fixed her furious eyes on me as I stood by the counter. She took a deep breath, and then she bellowed, her voice echoing off the tile walls, a sound of pure, unadulterated scorn. "This food is for pigs!" The silence that followed was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that fell over the entire room. Every customer, every employee, every person was frozen, staring first at Harper, then at me. They were waiting for me to shatter, to finally break under the weight of her public cruelty. And in that deafening quiet, as I held the gaze of my daughter-in-law, I did something no one expected. I smiled. My smile seemed to unnerve her. It was not the reaction she had scripted. "What are you smiling at?" she spat, her voice a mixture of confusion and renewed anger. "Are you insane?" "On the contrary, Harper," I said, my voice quiet but carrying through the silent room. "I am feeling remarkably sane." I gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod to Maria, who was already standing by the cash register, a large manila folder in her hands. She had been waiting. "Thank you for the feedback," I continued, turning my full attention back to my daughter-in-law. "As the owner of this establishment, I always appreciate hearing from our patrons, especially when the criticism is so passionate. A flicker of disbelief crossed Harper's face, followed by a derisive laugh. "Owner? You? Don't be ridiculous. You're a waitress." Just then, Maria walked over and placed the folder on the table in front of me with a quiet thud. I opened it calmly. The first document I laid on the table was the thick, notarized deed for the Morning Glory Diner. My name, Beverly Hayes, clearly listed as the sole proprietor. The second was a single, heavy business card. I slid it across the table toward Harper. The embossed letters glinted under the diner's warm lights. Beverly Hayes, Chairman, B.H. Holdings. Harper stared at the card, her mouth slightly agape. Tiffany and Chad exchanged panicked glances, the color draining from their faces. Just then, the bell above the door jingled, and Alex stepped inside, a forced, placating smile on his face, ready to smooth things over. He froze in the doorway, taking in the scene. His wife, pale and cornered. His mother, standing not as a victim, but as a figure of absolute authority. "But how?" Harper stammered, looking from the card back to my simple waitress uniform. Maria stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "Mrs. Hayes has signed my paychecks for the past 15 years. A low murmur spread through the diner, quickly followed by a smattering of applause from the corner booth where the construction crew sat. They had seen enough. I let the moment hang in the air, a perfect, satisfying silence. Then, my gaze shifted from Harper's stunned face down to the sticky, shattered mess on the floor. "And since you made this mess, Harper," I said, my voice now as cold and hard as polished steel, "you will be the one to clean it up. Get the mop." She stared at me, her eyes wide with horrified disbelief. I simply pointed toward the utility closet. "1 week," I added, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous tone. "You will work here for 1 week, cleaning this diner from top to bottom. If you refuse, I will make one phone call. To my lawyer. His name is Arthur Davies. Perhaps my son knows of him. And I will instruct him to begin the process of seizing every asset I have ever provided for the two of you." Under the unrelenting gaze of a dozen cell phone cameras, Harper, in her $1,000 dress, took the heavy, sloshing mop from Maria's hand. Her own hands trembled, not with effort, but with a humiliation so profound it was a physical force. Alex rushed forward then, his face a mask of pure panic. "Mom, don't do this, please," he begged, his voice cracking, grabbing my arm. It was the same weak, desperate plea I had heard 100 times before, the sound of his spineless capitulation. "Let her go. We'll leave. We'll do anything." I ignored him, gently removing his hand from my arm. My focus was on Harper. Her friends, Tiffany and Chad, seeing that the entertainment had turned dangerously real and that they were now part of a very public shaming, had gathered their things. Without a single backward glance, they scurried out the door like rats from a flooding ship. Harper was utterly alone. She plunged the mop into the bucket, splashing gray, sticky water onto her pristine silk shoes. Her first attempt to clean the floor was a clumsy, pathetic smear, pushing the syrup and glass fragments into a wider, uglier mess. A low, satisfying chuckle rippled through the diner from the construction crew's booth. I let her struggle for a long, silent minute, letting the full weight of her new reality sink in. Then, with deliberate slowness, I pulled my phone from my apron pocket. The simple action seemed to suck all the remaining air out of the room. I scrolled to my contacts, found the name Arthur Davies, and pressed the call button, making sure to activate the speakerphone before I lifted it to my ear. The phone rang once, a sharp electronic sound in the quiet diner, before he answered. "Arthur, it's Beverly," I said, my voice calm and clear. Resonating with an authority no one in that room had ever heard from me before. "It's time. Activate Protocol B." There was no hesitation on the other end, only the crisp, efficient voice of a man who had been prepared for this exact moment. "Understood, Madam Chairman," Arthur's voice boomed from the small speaker. "Freezing all subsidiary accounts. A hold is being placed on the joint credit lines. I am dispatching the reclamation notices for the condominium and the leased vehicle now. It will all be executed immediately." Alex stared at me, his face ashen. his mind clearly struggling to process the words. Condominium, leased vehicle, subsidiary accounts. It was a language from a world he never knew I inhabited. And then, as if on cue, his own phone buzzed loudly in his pocket. He fumbled for it, his hand shaking so violently he almost dropped it. He stared down at the notification on the screen, a stark digital alert from his bank, its message of doom glowing brightly. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a dawning absolute horror. Then his legs seemed to dissolve beneath him, and he crumpled to the checkered floor in a heap. I didn't even glance down at my son. My eyes were fixed on his wife, who had stopped mopping, the dirty mop held limply in her hand, her face a pale mask of terror. "This," I said, my voice a soft, chilling promise, "is only the beginning, dear. Welcome to the real world." Within 24 hours, their luxury condominium was sealed, a stark legal notice taped across the gleaming front door. The knock from the repossession agent, I was told, was a sound far more terrifying than any nightmare. The white Mercedes was towed from its designated parking spot later that afternoon, its silent departure leaving an empty space that mirrored the sudden void in their lives. Harper's week at the diner was a quiet, brutal spectacle. She arrived the first morning, Monday, dressed in jeans and an old sweatshirt, her face pale and her eyes red-rimmed. Maria handed her a pair of rubber gloves and pointed to the staff restrooms. There was no conversation, no gloating. The staff simply went about their work, treating her with a chilling professional indifference that was worse than any insult. My regulars, the ones who had witnessed her performance, would watch her scrub the floors, their expressions a mixture of pity and grim satisfaction. The video of the incident, filmed by one of the customers, had made the rounds on local social media, and she had become a minor, infamous local celebrity. She endured it all in a seething, broken silence, the arrogance stripped from her frame, leaving only a hollow shell of humiliation. I, on the other hand, spent that week in a different world. On Monday morning, I walked into the glass and steel lobby of the BH Holdings Tower downtown. The security guard, who knew me only as the quiet Mrs. H who occasionally visited Mr. Davies, did a double take as I walked past the front desk and took the private elevator to the penthouse floor. I sat behind the large mahogany desk in my office, Robert's office, for the first time in years. The panoramic view of the city stretched out before me, a kingdom built on concrete, steel, and my late husband's brilliant foresight. I looked at the photograph of him on my desk, his warm, confident smile a silent affirmation. We did this to protect him, I thought, and I failed. Now, all I could do was correct the course. Exactly 1 week after the diner incident, my assistant buzzed. "Ma'am, your son, Alex, is here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment." "Send him in," I said. The man who walked into my office was a stranger. The polished, confident son I knew was gone, replaced by a gaunt, disheveled figure. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes were bloodshot, and he looked as though he hadn't slept in a week. He collapsed into the leather chair opposite my desk without being invited. "They took everything," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "The condo, the car. They even froze Harper's personal accounts because her name was on the credit lines you were backing. Her parents won't even speak to us. They said we were a disgrace." He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with ragged sobs. "We have nothing, Mom. Nothing. We're staying in a cheap motel by the highway." He looked up, his eyes swimming with tears, the desperate, pleading look of a child. "I'm sorry. I know I was weak. I know I should have stopped her. Please, Mom. Help us. I'll do anything." I listened, my heart aching for the broken man before me, but my resolve did not waver. I opened a desk drawer and pulled out a small, crisp business card. I slid it across the polished surface of the desk. It was the card for a reputable job placement agency. "I have raised you, Alex," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "I have fed you, clothed you, and educated you. The rest is up to you. It is time for you to learn what it means to stand on your own 2 feet." He stared at the card as if it were a snake. Then he looked at me, a final, desperate question in his eyes. "And Harper?" "That is your choice, Alex," I replied. "But she will never receive another cent from this family again." The call came just after midnight, a shrill, angry sound that ripped through the quiet of my apartment. I saw an unfamiliar number on the screen but answered it anyway. The voice that boomed through the receiver was a bulldog's bark, full of bluster and entitlement. It was Harper's father. "You've ruined my daughter," he yelled, without any preamble. "We are going to sue you for everything you have, for public humiliation, for emotional distress. You have no idea who you're dealing with." I held the phone slightly away from my ear, letting his tirade wash over me. I felt no fear, only a profound sense of clarity. "I haven't ruined anyone, Mr. Vance," I said, my voice as calm and steady as a frozen lake. "Your daughter's own arrogance did that. She made a public scene, and I simply responded." "A response? You call that a response? You forced her to scrub floors like a common servant. Our friends, our community, everyone has seen that video. You've destroyed her reputation." "A reputation built on lies is not a reputation, sir. It's a costume. As for your lawsuit," I continued, my tone turning to ice, "I suggest you speak with my attorney first, Mr. Arthur Davies. He is already preparing a countersuit against your daughter for defamation and attempted fraud, and now he will be adding a harassment charge against you. Given that the video you mentioned clearly shows your daughter's unprovoked verbal assault, I believe our case is quite strong." There was a moment of sputtering silence on the other end. He was a bully, accustomed to people cowering. He didn't know how to handle someone who pushed back with superior force. He uttered a string of curses and slammed the phone down. I lowered the receiver, a deep weariness settling over me. The apple, I thought, hadn't fallen far from the tree. Harper was a product of this environment, a world where accountability was a foreign concept and blame was always someone else's fault. As I sat there in the quiet darkness, my computer screen chimed softly with a new email notification. It was from Arthur. The subject line was brief: "Update regarding Hayes matter." I clicked it open, my heart giving a small, weary lurch. The message was short, professional, and absolutely devastating. "Beverly, I feel it is my duty to inform you that Harper Hayes filed a petition for divorce from your son, Alex Hayes, this afternoon. The grounds cited are irreconcilable differences and financial incompetence." Financial incompetence. The sheer, breathtaking cruelty of it almost made me laugh. She had bled him dry, and now she was leaving him with the blame for being empty. I leaned back in my chair and closed my eyes, the screen's glow still visible through my eyelids. Perhaps this is for the best, I thought, letting out a long, slow breath. A painful, but necessary, liberation. 3 months had passed. 3 months of silence, of rebuilding, of finding a new, quieter rhythm. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, the air just beginning to carry the crisp hint of autumn. Alex appeared in the doorway of the diner, not in one of his tailored suits, but in the simple navy blue uniform of a package delivery company. He was thinner, and there were weary lines around his eyes I'd never seen before, but the evasive, haunted look was gone. In its place was a quiet, direct gaze. He didn't look at me with the shame of a fallen prince, but with the straightforward exhaustion of a man who had just finished a long shift. He walked not to me, but to the counter, waiting his turn behind a couple of regulars. When he reached the front, he looked at Maria, not me. "Just a black coffee to go, please," he said, his voice raspy. He pulled a crumpled $5 bill from his pocket and laid it on the counter. The gesture was so small, so simple, yet it spoke volumes. It was the first time in his adult life he had paid for anything in my presence. I walked over from the grill, wiping my hands on my apron. "Alex," I said softly. He turned, and for the first time, he met my eyes without flinching. "Hi, Mom." "Sit down for a minute," I said, gesturing to an empty booth by the window. He hesitated, then nodded, sliding onto the red vinyl seat. I brought his coffee over in a thick ceramic mug, not a paper cup. I sat down opposite him. "It's a tough job," he said, staring into the black coffee. "Long hours, lots of lifting. My back hurts most nights." He wasn't complaining, he was just stating facts. "I found a small apartment over on Elm Street. The rent's cheap. I'm paying my own bills. It's hard. Harder than I ever imagined." He took a sip of coffee, the silence stretching between us. "Harper's parents sent me the final divorce papers last week. I signed them." He finally looked up from his mug, his eyes clear and filled with a profound, painful honesty. "I was wrong, Mom," he said, his voice low and steady. "I was a fool. I was a coward. I stood by and let her disrespect you, in our home, in your diner. I let her blind me because I was terrified of losing the life she represented, the life you paid for." The confession, so direct and unsparing, was the apology I had waited for, the one I never thought I would receive. A lump formed in my throat, a complex knot of sorrow for his journey and pride for the man he was becoming. I didn't say anything. Words felt inadequate, too cheap for this moment. Instead, I stood up, walked behind the counter to the cooling rack where the morning's baking rested. I picked up a large, sugar-dusted blueberry muffin, the kind I used to make for him on Saturday mornings when he was a boy. I placed it on a small plate and set it gently on the table in front of him. He stared at the muffin, then up at me, his eyes suddenly shimmering with unshed tears. The bravado, the exhaustion, all of it fell away, and for a fleeting second, I saw my little boy again. "Thanks, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Our relationship wasn't healed, not by a long shot, but the wound had finally begun to close. 6 months later, I was back behind the counter at the Morning Glory Diner. Not as a chairman or a millionaire, but simply as Beverly. The rich aroma of coffee was the same, the comforting sizzle from the griddle was the same, but I had changed. A sense of peace had settled deep within my bones. A quiet strength that had been forged in the fire. I polished the glass over Robert's photograph by the register and allowed myself a small, knowing smile. "I did the right thing, didn't I, honey?" I whispered. My days had found a new, gentler rhythm. I still came to the diner 3 days a week, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. It was my connection to him, to a life of honest work that had given me everything. The other days were spent in my office downtown, overseeing the work of BH Holdings. Last month, with Arthur's help, I had finalized the changes to my will. The bulk of my estate would now go to a collection of charities focused on vocational training and supporting single mothers. For Alex, I had established a strict trust fund. It would match his earned income, dollar for dollar, ensuring he would always have a safety net, but never again a free ride. It was the last, most difficult lesson in self-reliance I could give him. He visited more often now. Sometimes, at the end of his long delivery shifts, he would stop by just as we were closing. He wouldn't ask for anything. He would just grab a rag and help Maria wipe down the tables or carry a heavy bus tub back to the kitchen. We didn't talk much about what had happened. We didn't have to. The shared work, the quiet understanding in the small, familiar space, was more than enough. Our relationship was healing, slowly, being rebuilt not on financial dependence, but on a foundation of newfound, hard-won respect. Last week, I'd hired a new waitress, a bright young woman named Sarah, who was putting herself through community college. She had a fierce work ethic that reminded me of myself at that age. Seeing her bustling around the diner, her face full of hope and determination, filled me with a sense of continuity, a feeling that the values Robert and I had built this place on would live on. This morning, as I watched Sarah expertly handle a table of demanding tourists, I made a final decision. I picked up the phone and called Arthur. "Arthur," I said, my voice full of a joy I hadn't felt in years. "I want to establish a new foundation, the Robert Hayes Second Chance Scholarship. We'll use the profits from the downtown properties. I want to fund students who are working their way through trade school." After I hung up, I looked out the large front window of the diner. The morning sun was brilliant, casting long, hopeful shadows across the street. Sarah walked by with a fresh pot of coffee, and I smiled at her. "Welcome to the morning glory," I said, my heart feeling lighter than it had in a lifetime. "We always have room for hardworking people here." Life, in all its beautiful, simple, and hopeful ways, was still moving forward. As I smiled at my newest employee, the words, "Welcome to the morning glory," felt less like a greeting and more like a declaration of my own new beginning. I finally understood that justice isn't about revenge, it's about reclaiming the peace and dignity that was taken from you. The hardest lesson was realizing that you can't buy respect, and true family is built on shared values, not shared expenses. The scent of fresh coffee filled the air, a simple, honest smell that was finally just for me. I'd love to connect with you in the comments. Have you ever had to draw a line in the sand to reclaim your own worth?